Think back to the fifth console generation, the Nintendo 64, the PlayStation 1, the Sega Saturn, yes, I know it's pronounced Saturn, but I prefer the German way to say it. The generation that really started the Nintendo is for babies and PlayStation is for the real cool guy stuff. Obviously Sega tried to do it earlier too with their marketing, but let's be honest, if you talk badly about your opponents and you end up losing against them, it won't really stick and people will think you're a loser. The PlayStation 1 was the home of the coolest games known to mankind: Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill, Tekken, Driver, Tomb Raider. It was the console for the mature and cool people instead of all those colorful dumb Nintendo games. But you know one really cool game that the PlayStation 1 didn't have, a game that actually no one really had except for people living in Japan or people who were really deep into video games, so they imported stuff that looks interesting. I'm really happy that region locking is finally a thing of the past. The name of that game, Sin and Punishment, a real shooter that goes insanely hard, which can be played on any Switch nowadays because it was added to the Nintendo Switch Online Nintendo 64 expansion pack. What a name. If you play it on there though, all the text will be in Japanese, but there's also an English translation for the Nintendo 64 version, which translates all the menus and the dialogue, which is actually not really needed since the game only has English voice acting, so while the dialogue at the bottom of the Switch is in Japanese, you will still hear them talking in English so you understand what's going on in the story. They wanted to make a game that appeals to the English market but then just never released it here, mostly because it came out so late in the lifespan of the Nintendo 64. But the cool thing is that the English translation also comes with a translated manual that does explain the game really well and outlines more about the story. One thing I have to tell you right from the start is, if you're not used to these kind of games, don't be embarrassed about playing it on easy, especially if you're a person that easily gets frustrated. It has the extreme kind of continuous system. Once you're out of continuous, it's really game over, which can make you either mad, sad, or also feel bad, or all three emotions at once when you realize you may have just wasted an hour of your life and have to redo it all again, if you even want to do that. Just wanted to give you a little warning about that. With save states and being able to rewind it though, it also shouldn't be too much of a problem if you want to use those tools. It's up to you. Continues are fairly easy to get though, since you get one every time you kill 100 enemies. That sounds like a lot, but it's really not. Not in this game at least. Don't kill people in real life. Especially not 100 of them. The gameplay is just so simple and satisfying. I love trying to avoid things coming right at me in video games. It just gives me a rush being able to dodge at the last possible second, or being able to press a button to shoot a projectile right back at the person who shot it at me. It's just so rewarding. That's also most likely why I always love being a goalkeeper when playing football with friends. Anticipating when the other person shoots and jumping at the right time to save the ball from going into the goal, or getting it kicked right into your nuts and you developing a questionable fetish because of that. Didn't happen to me, but it can happen. I just love my reflexes being tested. But it's not all just about reflexes, but also about learning the patterns of the enemies, bosses, and also the levels themselves. Knowing what comes up next so you can already get your pointer ready to aim there and not suddenly getting surprised helps you a lot to not take damage that makes you think, heck, I could have avoided that and now I will have to fight the boss with 20% health and for sure probably spend at least one continue on it. Every new one makes you memorize it more and more, and it's a great feeling to take a boss down that took you tons of tries before, but then boom, this time you didn't spend a single continue on that clown. You know what they say, practice makes perfect, most of the time. Also, it's about getting used to the controls, which can be a bit confusing at first if you suck at having to do two things at once like me sometimes. I never played the game with an actual Nintendo 64 controller sadly, so I can only speak about it with a normal controller like the Switch Pro controller. Obviously you can rebind it to make it more suited for yourself, but the left stick is for aiming the cursor while the right stick is for moving left and right, and pressing into a direction twice makes it roll. The L and R buttons are for jumping, you even have a double jump, very important. Every game with a double jump is a good game, and you can put the shoot or melee attack button onto ZR or ZL. That's how I played it. Doesn't sound too complicated, but it can take a bit to get really into the rhythm of it, and sometimes when I got too overwhelmed I mix up the aiming stick with the walking stick. Maybe that will happen to you too. Or maybe it won't if you're good at video games, not like I am. I can be good, but I mostly suck. On the Nintendo 64 you can even play co-op. I don't know how the Switch Online works with this game or locally because I never played with it. But one person gets to move with one controller and the other person gets to aim with the other controller. Sounds like fun if I had friends to play it with. So I would just have to do it alone with two controllers. I think that could be a good challenge. It's a rail shooter and you know what it means, you shoot, but you also got a sword for mini attacks which also has a parry, and parrying actually becomes really important. And with important I mean it's actually mandatory to use it at certain points. Not so much in the normal stages, but bosses sometimes will only really be able to be beaten when you throw the projectiles back at them. And even in the stages itself it can save your butt a lot, like here on the ship stage. There's tons of missile launchers and shooting them normally takes a bit to blow them up, but if you just parry a rocket right back at them they go kaboom. And the timing for a parry is extremely graceful. You don't really need to time it at all and are even allowed to spam the Z button. Other games will punish you for just spamming it like crazy, but here the game doesn't mind it, luckily. The bosses are the most fun in the game because bosses should be the highlight of almost any game that has them. In a way, they even feel like a relief sometimes. In normal stages there's so many things shooting at you, while the bosses are mostly 1 versus 1 and it's easier to pay attention to their patterns, especially since they are not the most extreme ones. Their patterns are mostly really easy to find out and they don't have many of them. They just mostly do the same thing over and over, which makes it easy to get into the groove. And there's just so many of them, especially mini bosses. Some of my favorites were the crawfish, where you have to shoot these little rockets right at him with the sword or else you will most likely run out of time and die. Leader, a little cat or dog, some may even call it a cat dog, I missed that show. It's kinda the same here, where you throw the flying rockets right at her, and it's actually not one of my favorite fights since it's really easy, but I just wanted to talk about her because I put her onto the thumbnail, so now it's a double cat power, but accordingly to the manual she was a human child at the age of 5 who transformed into this after one of the villains gave her his blood. Normally when people transform they lose their mind, but she kept hers, so she's a little annoying brat. On the wiki page she's stated to be 6 years old, so I don't know who is telling the truth, if she's 6 or 5, but it's the same age anyways. There's also a picture of her on it from the manga where, you know, I don't think the age matches with that appearance. It made me check out the manga though, and you can find it on Reddit through a Google search, and it basically is completely different from the actual game. Listen to her little noises though. Then there's also a co-worker who turned into this big bio-mecha thingy that you fight in a sea full of blood. How cool is that? I love blood. Not in the weird way, but just its aesthetic. Deep red blood is just really cool, you know? The color of it. And in how many games do you even get to fight Earth, even if it may be a fake one? Not enough. This is one of them though. The only other one I can really think of right now is Omori, and well, they're really different from each other. If you know any more games where you fight Earth, please let me know. There's just so many bosses that you will fight one almost every minute pretty much. They just keep on coming and it will make you so happy. There's also 2 different modes to play the game with, manual aiming and a lock-on system, which I would not really recommend. Your shots do less damage with it and getting used to manually aiming will make it easier. It's like learning how to ride a bike without those extra little tires that give you stability. It can be of help against enemies that love to jump around a lot, but still, you will most likely run out of time on some bosses because of the lesser damage. But I'm not your mom or dad, so I can't tell you what to do, so find your own best way of playing. I also absolutely love how the game looks. It looks more like a PlayStation 1 game than a Nintendo 64 game, if that makes sense. Nintendo 64 textures always look cleaner and more simple to me, while when it comes to PlayStation 1 games they always had this more pixelated look to it. You probably know what I mean, right? I'm not the best when it comes to explaining technical aspects of gaming, because I pretty much only got my 2 eyes to work with instead of actual knowledge of how they achieve these looks. So many things on the screen and it never slows down or anything like that, just staying smooth despite some stages having tons of enemies and their projectiles on the screen. It may not be the most beautiful game of all time, but it just looks so cool. It just does. The whole aesthetic, especially the enemy designs, there's just so much variety in them and in these stages too. So, the last thing that is missing is the story, and well, it's all over the place and hard to really explain, but I will try. There will be spoilers for everything happening, so if you care about spoilers in a game like this, then you better go play it right now. When you play the game, you can understand what is going on while also not really knowing any crucial information. In simple terms, your blood is special, other people also have special blood. Special blood makes you able to transform, but there's side effects like never being able to turn human again and all that. There's also the ruffians who were lab-created animals who kinda mutated and are freak over the world. You wanna stop them, you get betrayed. You fight your old friend who turned herself into a fake Earth that she wants you to take over with your powers, you reject that and end up dooming the real Earth, kinda. That's the story in simple and short terms, still leaving out stuff like you having a vision of your own kid in the future, which confirms Saki and Aaron as one of the few Nintendo characters that actually had sex. And you even play as a kid in the sequel for the Wii, but they're not really super duper connected to each other. The fan station also has the whole manual translated, which explains a bit more, like If you just play the game normally, you would kind of think the ruffians are just aliens attacking Earth instead of being man-made, since humanity is overpopulated and food is getting scarce, so they try to make a whole new species of animals that could be food. It's a story that actually does have a bit of depth to it when you really think about it, but it feels more like the kind of story that works in the way of, I want this next enemy to be fought in a sea of blood, and it has to be a giant mecha bioweapon thing. Just make that happen, doesn't matter what the story behind it is. It's style over substance, but that's not always a bad thing, especially in a game like this. I want it to be the coolest stuff possible. At one point you just cut open Saki's mecha thingy and get inside of it to try to talk some sense into him and become human again. And then he just carries you inside of him. Isn't that romantic? One of his last lines in the game is pretty much this after the world is just kinda doomed.
When I was little, I always wanted to be a cop. Do you think they'd hire me now?
Cheesy, but kinda cool. So maybe this little video made you interested in trying it out, which I hope. Or maybe instead you're gonna tell me that there's cooler games on the Nintendo 64 like Bug Bumble. But in my opinion there is no other game on this console that matches the coolness of Sin and Punishment. None. May not be the best game even though it's in my top 5, but the coolest. And that's what matters the most sometimes. I can also easily recommend the second game on the Wii, even though that one misses a bit of the coolness of the first game. It's still a great game that every Wii owner should own. With that said, I hope you're gonna have a radical day and a comfy night if you go to sleep soon. Good night.